There's a lot going on in the world of sports right now, and for basketball fans, one of those things is the fact that the NBA regular season is right around the corner. This has been a pretty hectic offseason filled with roster turnover, blockbuster deals going down, and interesting moves across the board, so the way things shake out could be completely different this year compared to how things were a year ago. Everybody likes to throw their 2 cents in on stuff like this, and I'm no different, so in today's video, I will be giving you my 5 bold predictions for the 2024 NBA season. These are things that aren't necessarily expected to happen or likely to happen, but I do think there's an outside chance of them going down. Before we start though, it turns out a good amount of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but I'd also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. My first bold prediction for the season is that the New Orleans Pelicans will finish in the top 3 of the Western Conference standings. I know this one definitely seems like something out of left field, but trust me, I have a reasoning for it. The Pelicans entered last season with pretty lofty expectations, similar to this very goal, because the team that they put together looked ready to compete. They ended up finishing in 10th place in the Western Conference standings and didn't make it out of the play-in tournament, so all of the momentum from a year ago has pretty much died down. The thing that most forget though, is that midway through December last year, which is about 1/3 of the way through the season, the Pelicans were the ones sitting in first place in the Western Conference standings, looking every bit like a championship contender. Obviously, this isn't going to surprise you either, but that was also around the time that Zion Williamson suffered another injury, causing him to miss the rest of the season, so their ability to compete at the highest level very much depends on Williamson being healthy. Brandon Ingram is an all-star caliber scorer on the wing, CJ McCollum still has 20 points per game left in his tank, Trey Murphy is an incredibly promising 3-and-D wing player that brings balance to the lineup, Herb Jones is one of the best defensive forwards in the entire league period, Jonas Valanciunas plays his role well inside, collecting plenty of rebounds and finishing strong around the basket. It all just comes down to Zion Williamson. The reason why this is such a bold prediction is because Zion has yet to prove that he can stay healthy over the course of an entire season, but I think this might be the year we finally see it happen, and if that's the case, then the Pelicans will be ready to shock a lot of people. My next bold prediction for the upcoming NBA season is that the Boston Celtics will win fewer games this season than they did last season. The Celtics were one of the most active teams in the entire league this offseason, making a few big-time acquisitions that have, rightfully so, generated a lot of excitement around this Celtics team. They started things off by trading for Kristaps Porzingis, and then they finished the period off by trading for Jrue Holiday, so now those two, alongside Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown, are expected to make for an incredibly formidable lineup that will win a lot of games. I'm not even here to disagree with that notion. I just think teams that bring in a lot of new faces tend to need some time to work out the kinks of playing together, and while that is happening, they'll probably drop more games than expected, especially early on. They're also coming off of a season where they won 57 games, which is a lot as is. Throw in the fact that in order to acquire this talent, they lost their locker room leader Marcus Smart, Coach Joe Mazzulla was a noticeable downgrade from Ime Udoka, and Kristaps Porzingis has a history of struggling with injuries, and there's a lot of things that could cause some bumps in the ride along the way. The Celtics also have much less depth this year than they did last year, after losing Robert Williams, Malcolm Brogdon, Grant Williams, and Marcus Smart in order to build the roster that they have now. I'm not saying that the Celtics aren't one of the best teams in the East, because they definitely are, but I think a more realistic win total for them this season is around 54 or 55, compared to 57. My next bold prediction for the upcoming NBA season is that the Sacramento Kings are going to miss the playoffs. Last year, the Kings were the feel-good story of the season when they ended their 16-year playoff drought by finishing as the 3 seed in the West. They also return basically the same roster this year that they had last season, so you're probably wondering why I think things will be different for them this season, but that right there is part of the problem in and of itself. The Western Conference standings last season, to put it simply, were a bit of a mess. There really wasn't any bit of consistency at all by any of the teams in the running, and the 4 seed to the 10 seed were only separated by 3 games in the standings, to illustrate how much of an inseparable cluster it was. A lot of the top teams either struggled with key injuries, or they started much slower than anticipated and turned it on too late, and a lot of that momentum carried into this offseason, where those same teams then went on to make moves to bolster their rosters and build on that momentum, while the Kings sort of just stayed put. Teams that didn't make the playoffs last year, like the Pelicans, Mavericks, and even the Thunder, are coming hard for a playoff spot this season, which would mean that 2 or 3 teams could be passed up on to make room for them, and I'm sorry, but I think the Kings will be one of those teams. The Kings were the league's top-ranked offense last year, and that covered up a lot of holes that they had on the defensive end, where they were the worst-ranked defense amongst the group that made the playoffs. With the same roster, they'll still be a dominant offense, but repeating as the best offense in the league will be a tall task, and with those same defensive holes, they could leave themselves exposed to get passed in the standings if a few of those other contenders in the conference actually play more consistently this season. My next bold prediction is that the Chicago Bulls will trade both Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan this season before the trade deadline. The Bulls are in a very weird spot right now. They're too good to rebuild through the draft, and they're not good enough to have any kind of realistic hopes for a deep playoff run. They're stuck hovering in mediocrity, which in the NBA is the worst place you could possibly be. This always tends to be something that the franchises themselves live in denial about for a while, and based on the decisions that the Bulls made this offseason, they're no different. But when the results on the court don't come in for them, they're going to be faced with a tough decision. DeMar DeRozan is a free agent this summer, and there seems to be very little chance of him sticking around, because he'll want to maximize his ability to compete in the playoffs in the remaining few seasons that he has left in his career. He's the exact type of player that teams will be going after hard at the trade deadline, because he can help a team go all in on winning now without any long-term commitment. If the Bulls do end up trading him, then that will be the point when they admit that their season is a dud, and if they get to that point, then I feel as though it will be unlikely that Zach LaVine will want to stick around on a sinking ship. That will be the point that the Bulls shift their focus to another rebuild, and with 3 years left on LaVine's contract, he will hold plenty of value on the trade market to get them some valuable assets to kickstart that future. And finally, my last bold prediction for the upcoming season is that James Harden will be traded to a team that isn't the Los Angeles Clippers. Out of all of the popular offseason storylines, the James Harden saga is the one that remains unfinished and will likely continue on into the season. Harden wants to be traded, and the Clippers are the team he wants to go to, but the Clippers themselves really haven't done much to actually trade for him. Harden is by no means the dominant superstar that he was at his peak in Houston, but he is still coming off of a year where he led the NBA in assists and is a fantastic playmaker. So the fact that the most the Clippers have been willing to offer in a trade to this point has been a couple of their old players on bad contracts and a draft pick tells me that they're not that desperate to bring Harden in. They've made it clear that Terrence Mann is quote-unquote untouchable in trade talks, which seems ridiculous being that Mann is a very good role player admittedly, but he's also 27 years old, coming off of a season where he averaged 9 points per game, so treating him like a young star on the rise is pretty outlandish. This is setting up for another team to swoop in with any semblance of a real offer and snag Harden away from them, which it feels like is exactly what Sixers president Daryl Morey is waiting for. With Harden's contract set to expire next summer anyway, and the Sixers planning to open up as much cap space as possible for that period, they seem content to hold on to him as long as they need to. So if the Clippers refuse to offer anything of value, then either someone else will, or Harden just won't go anywhere. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what your bold predictions are for this new season. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.